Welcome to a Tweedy Misc video. Bizarre channel for putting things in that don't fit anywhere else. I was invited yesterday to a salon, I think it's called, a sort of an artistic discussion at the Royal Academy. Not on my own merit, I should add. I have a friend who is I think a very talented painter. So he thought it would be fun to bring me along, even though I'm absolutely not in the art world. I have no background in art. And the premise for the evening was that everybody showing up would bring an image, quite explicitly not their own work. This wasn't just an excuse to aggrandize their own work, and talk about that image in about 100 words, right? A short passage about why that image is interesting or meaningful or influential. I found this a surprisingly fun experience, doing something where I was clearly utterly out of my depth. Lots of people in that room that knew all sorts of things about art, and I know practically nothing. But I did choose an image, something I stumbled across earlier this week when I was researching for the video I did on Notting Hill pubs on the Tweedy Pubs channel. I was looking for images relating to the sun in Splendour, which was one of the pubs that I featured in that video, because it's a heraldic device. I thought there might be a nice old painting or something. So I was searching around on the web. And what I did find is this painting, and it caught my eye because it looks like a very rural, a very bucolic scene. It's one of those mid to latter Victorian romantic landscapes, I suppose you would call this. It's by an artist called John MacWhirter, Scottish artist. He was a member of the Royal Academy and the Scottish equivalent of the Royal Academy. Born in Scotland, eventually moved down to London and worked here for, I think, the last few decades of his life. This image, which looks incredibly bucolic, is actually of Hampstead Heath. It is dated to 1862. In 1862, he would have been in his early 30s, I think. It has an alternative title, which is When the Sun in Splendour Fades. So that's how I found it as a result of this search for images relating to the sun in Splendour. But it obviously caught my eye because it was Hampstead Heath, and that's somewhere I spend a lot of time drinking wine. Several things about this painting struck me as indicating a sort of premature air of nostalgia and melancholy for a painter who, if we believe that date of 1862, as I say, would have just been in his early 30s. Coupled with that title, When the Sun in Splendour Fades, I assume based on that this is an image of sunset, a somewhat melancholy, nostalgic time of day. It's also an autumnal scene. You can see most of the leaves are changing colour. They're going yellowy, orangey, browny colours, and of course autumn is a nostalgic, melancholic time of year as well. However, in contrast to most of those yellowy orange leaves, over to the right hand side of the image there is a cluster of Scots pines, and I wonder if this is a deliberate inclusion from John MacWhirter as a sort of symbol of homesickness, perhaps an additional layer of melancholy. He is a little bit sad about the fact that he has been displaced from his native Scotland. I got the sense the motivation for moving down to London was at least partly commercial. He actually died quite a rich man by all accounts, and his art, although based on the reaction from the artists at the Royal Academy yesterday, probably is not considered to be particularly edgy or controversial or influential. It was very commercial at the time. He was clearly able to sell a lot of his landscape paintings and lived a very comfortable existence here in London. Big house with a studio in it in somewhere like Maida Vale, I think he lived. To me, by London standards, that looks like a pretty broad, pretty wide space, so he was obviously doing fairly well for himself. I think the Scots pines were something of a motif of MacWhirter's work. He originally was more famous for painting scenes of the Scottish Highlands. Although there are genuinely Scots pines present on Hampstead Heath, they're surrounding the barrow today. There's a tumulus, probably not genuinely ancient barrow. It may well be a folly of the 18th century, but I feel as though there's an element of him highlighting those and choosing that particular location where he found those Scots pines was partly a sort of a signalling of a little bit of homesickness. Although again, as I say, this is also a motif of John MacWhirter's work. And I suppose the final layer of nostalgia and melancholy in this piece of art is that it shows an entirely rural, entirely countryside scene from Hampstead Heath in 1862, if that date is to be believed. Difficult for me to imagine a spot on Hampstead Heath today where you could stand and have a distant view, as there is in this painting, where there are no houses, there's no signs of the urban sprawl of London. Even in 1862, I think that would have been hard work in reality to find that distant view without any signs of civilization off in the distance. That is this additional air of melancholy that an area of countryside has been gradually sort of encircled and enclosed by the sprawl of London. One of the things I love about Hampstead Heath is that rather than a planned city park, this does feel, in places at least, this little bit of woods where I'm sitting right now, it feels like a genuine original piece of countryside that the city happens to have grown around. There is this huge continuity going back for centuries of woodland here. I think the bit of woodland I'm sitting in here is called the Kenwood, and that's where Kenwood House takes its name from. But I think this has always been wooded. The oak tree that I'm sitting at the base of here is likely hundreds of years old. So everything here is, to some extent, genuine countryside, even though it's in a part of London that really isn't that far out of the centre. There is civilization and development, urban sprawl all around it. So yes, I suppose that is the final element of nostalgia and melancholy. I feel as though John MacWhirter is sort of documenting the fact that Hampstead Heath, once a surprisingly rural landscape, is inevitably going to be caged and encircled and trapped by that urban sprawl of London. So I thought this was a lovely image. I really was taken by that. I don't think the attendees, certainly not the facilitator, she certainly thought it was quite a boring pedestrian kitsch sort of image. Didn't use those exact words, but there was a certain disdain in the way she referred to it. But I thought it was something kind of quite eye-catching to me. It meant something to me personally and quite interesting. So there you go, a bit of an obscure commentary of a probably forgotten about painting of Hampstead Heath. John MacWhirter, 1862, When the Sun in Splendour Fades.